let me tell you about this album. This album, unlike any album that's cut with groups these days, was finished in 5 days and mixed in 2 days. Now this is, absolutely unprecedented, the way Columbia works nowadays. I mean, a Simon and Garfunkel album, or a Bruce Springsteen album. I mean, this is 6 or 7 months in the studio of, experimentation, of discarding this, adding that, overdubbing. None of that with Bob. And this album has a flow that you won't find in any other album recorded in 1974.
Good evening, ladies and gentlemen, and welcome to Wall of Power TV. I'm your host, Paul Metsa. We have a most incredible show tonight that I'm very honored to be a part of. Part of the story started 44 years ago, got picked up in 2001, which is the reason why these gentlemen are here tonight to talk about their participation in one of Bob Dylan's greatest records called Blood on the Tracks. It's a divorce record, it was a comeback record, and it was recorded in Minneapolis, Minnesota on a couple of cold nights in December in 1974. But this is also a very special occasion. Besides getting 4 of the original players on the record, we have Chris Webber on Skype from California, and we will be talking to Bill Berg, the drummer, by phone. I would like to introduce a man that I got to know when I banged down his door in Los Angeles trying to get a gig in the early 90s. We became very good friends. Songwriter, cool cat, and the guy that played guitar on Tangled Up in Blue, Kevin Odegaard. Kevin, what do we got going on here today?
It was a cold, dark night in late December. I was watching Kojak, and the phone rang. And on the other end was David Zimmerman. What happened over the next 44 and a half years has resulted in us getting together one last time tonight to celebrate the release of the reissue of Blood on the Tracks, which was why the phone was ringing. We'll talk a little bit about that, and we'll give you some trivia, some stories around the recording of Blood on the Tracks. We didn't know each other, really, before that. We were glued together by David Zimmerman, and we're very different people. All of us come from different styles, different idioms, and we had different things to contribute to what became Bob Dylan's best-selling studio recording. Steve Berkowitz and Jeff Slate produced the reissue we're going to talk about today. They're experts from Sony Legacy. They've been working together. Berkowitz has been doing the last several bootleg series recordings from Bob Dylan. And we'll tell you more details about what's in the 3 different packages of More Blood, More Tracks, named by Bob Dylan himself, as we go through the night. And I'll move on and introduce next to me the keyboard player I was lucky enough to bring into the sessions. And he'd been playing with me and I with him for a couple of years before that. We played a bunch of gigs, and I thought he was just the bee's knees. He was really, really great on keyboards, and when David Zimmerman asked me, who's your #1 pick, here he is, ladies and gentlemen, Greg
Inhofer.
Thanks, Kevin.
Could you introduce Mr. Ostroushko in your best Bob voice?
Yeah, and I'm mandolin, Peter Ostroushko.
Next to Peter is a fellow, the #1 bass player in the Twin Cities for the last 40 years. I just want to say ahead of time, I've been in town for 40 years, and I've not only got to know these guys, I've got to play with all of them. And it's an honor to be here tonight celebrating some of us 40 years of friendship. But one of my favorite bass players, who I saw first with Leo Kottke at the Guthrie Theater in 1972 with Bill Berg, who we will be talking to later, the night I decided to become a professional musician, Billy Peterson.
Is that a fact?
Yeah,
Really?
true fact.
Oh, thank
I don't know
you.
whether to kill you guys or kiss you. And then on the end, one of the most astute music critics in America, who's been with the Star Tribune since right after the Civil War. The guy's been to more free shows than anybody I know, but he's a superb writer. He's been following the story since December of 1974, and he's going to be presenting these gentlemen with their box sets. Mr. John Bream.
Thank you, Paul. This is the box set, and I just want to say this project for some of these folks here represents sort of one shining moment, maybe their Olympics, when they had that great moment with the greatest Bob Dylan album, For My Money. For others, this project was sort of a launching pad to long and fruitful careers in the music business and other creative worlds. And those of us in Minnesota have known for a long time that these gentlemen, these musicians, were on this record. But it was never on the record when it came out, because the album was already printed before the Minneapolis Sessions took place. So they never ever received official and proper credit until now. With this project, these musicians receive validation and vindication for their contributions to one of the most important Bob Dylan records of all time. So it's my honor to present each of you with your own copy, this heavy 6-disc version of More Blood, More Tracks. Congratulations.
Pass them around. How did it sound, Billy?
Unbelievable. We did a little interview, Kevin and I, yesterday also about this release on this, and we threw it up on a little Sony, one of those small little Sonys. My gosh, it's remixed. What did you call it?
Unproduced.
Unproduced. It's a great analogy, and that's real close to the truth. It's unproduced. They cleaned up all the tracks, took off all the reverbs, that were used in 1974, and as you know, Tangled Up in Blue is a Paul Martinson on-the-fly Safety Master mix, and that's the one that everybody's accustomed with, and that's heard all through the last 44 years. However, wait till you hear this mix.
Wow.
It's just like he's sitting right here and right in your face. Everything, it's incredible.
Billy, I got to ask you, did it bring back listening to the unmixed, the unmastered version, unmixed version, did it bring back memories? Did it bring you back to the studio?
When you pull those reverbs out that were that old, and clean everything up and stick everything right in your face, bass is right in your face, everything. I can hear his guitar parts, I can never hear every nuance. So
Billy's been on hundreds of recordings, more than any of us, maybe thousands.
I don't know. I hope not.
What happened to us yesterday in talking about it and hearing it, and that was the first time I'd heard it too.
Oh, it was? Okay.
It floored me, and I think it affected you too, because by the time we were done listening to Tangled Up in Blue, we were all in tears, and so were the two cameramen, and they are He-Men who cover Vikings games. So there were big man tears flying around this little studio yesterday, and it was a very emotional experience to hear this.
Yeah.
I'm welling up now. So.
We will be right back with the Blood on the Tracks boys on Wall of Power TV.
There's always something going on at Grumpy's. For happy hour on Monday, it's half-price beer and wine. Killer prices on local taps all day Saturday, and bottles of wine at half price every Sunday. At night, the turntables at Grumpy's stay busy with the Minnesota Music Listening Party on Monday and Vino Vinyl on Thursday night. Trailer Park Trivia packs the house on Wednesday night at 8 p.m. And don't miss T-Bone Bingo on Sunday nights. They have it all. Every night of the week, it's Grumpy's Northeast.
For a whole new you, make a date with Bourbon and Beau's Salon in Northeast Minneapolis. Open weekdays at 11:30, we have the stylists, products, ambiance, and experience you've been looking for. Check it out at 331 13th Avenue Northeast or call 612-205-8346 to make an appointment. Ready to lose a few inches? Jazz it up? Get some new color. Let those locks flow. There's nothing a shot of bourbon and a blow dry can't fix. Not sure what to get that special someone? Your search is over with gift cards in any amount. Ask about Refer a Friend Fridays and Transformation Tuesdays. Bourbon and Beau's, your next salon experience, only in Northeast Minneapolis. Come and see us at 331 13th Avenue Northeast or call 612-205-8346 to discover a whole new you.
If you've got gear, you need a case, and why not use the best? Alcorn Custom Case was started by Billy Alcorn, who's been in the music business for 30 years. And his small family business, located in the heart of Nashville, has been satisfying customers since 2006. Here are a few of Alcorn Custom Case's famous clients. When you're on the road, your gear has to get there in one piece. Stop in on Billy at Alcorn Custom Case and have a specially made case designed just for you. Alcorn Custom Case can be found on the web at alcorncustomcase.com or stop in at 3215 Ambrose Avenue in Nashville or just give Billy a call at 615-678-6259. Alcorn Custom Case. Don't trust your gear with anyone else.
I want you to meet Two Gingers Irish Whiskey. I'm Kieran and I'm Irish, so I tend to like a challenge. Why not? I wanted a whiskey to help find me out what's out there. Like what's really out there. And I found the oldest distillery in Ireland with a water wheel and awards for its small family of whiskies in the middle of Ireland. As I've always seen it, you can't win the lottery unless you buy a ticket. So try it. The investment is small and the flavor is big. It's perfect for drinking neat, its character holds up, like the Irish, when the bastards try to get you down. Two Gingers Irish Whiskey, distilled twice for more character, time for more flavor, and less of the old burn. No lite bastardes carborundum. Don't let the bastards get you down.
Welcome back to Wall of Power TV. I'm your host, Paul Metsa. We're continuing a great night in conversation with first four of the guys that played on Bob Dylan's Minneapolis Sessions for Blood on the Tracks. And now we are joined by a fifth guy from California through the wonder of technology, Mr. Chris Weber. Chris, how are you tonight?
Hello, guys. I'm doing great. Nice to hear from you.
Oh, there you are. You snuck up behind me. Now, Chris, tell us the story. You ran one of the greatest guitar shops in the Twin Cities called The Podium, and you got a call one night. Bob Dylan was looking for a particular Martin guitar. Tell us that story.
Yes, it was a great, I call it the acoustic mecca of its day. People, we were specializing in acoustic guitars. And so we did a lot of business in the used market and Martins and so on. And so I got a call from an old friend, Kevin Odegaard, saying that he was looking for a specific small-bodied Martin guitar that hopefully vintage, an old one that we, might have something like that he was looking for.
What was the model, the actual model number?
The model was a 0042, 1937. And 3 days prior to that, a young man had come in and asked if he could consign said guitar, and I said sure. And so anyway, we had it for sale, and so I said to Kevin, "Oh, you've seen it?" And he said, "What do you mean?" And I said, we have a 1937 0042, just exactly what you're looking for. So he says, I'll call you right back. And I thought, well, that's strange. So 10 minutes later, he calls me back and says, listen, I'm going to come and pick that guitar up. And I can't tell you much about anything except you'll probably sell it. Didn't ask how much I wanted for it. And I said, whoa. I said, I'm not, the guitar isn't leaving here. It's not my inventory. I don't own it. It's on consignment.
Chris,
So,
who did the guitar belong to? Do you remember?
No, it was an older gentleman who had passed away, and I believe it was his grandson, a young man, probably 18, 20 years old, just brought it to the store. And so truly a twist of fate. Had we not had that guitar, I wouldn't have ended up being, the 12-string on Tangled Up in Blue and 3 other songs. Having had 2 wonderful nights of fun and great experience that I'll treasure for all these years.
Now I have to ask you.
Yes.
Actually, this question's from Kevin Odegaard. How the hell did you weasel your way onto the session?
After a couple of calls, and I knew that Kevin knew the people in the Dylan camp and had some connection to them. And so I began to put it together in my mind because Kevin was being cagey as to who it was for and so on, that I thought, oh God, this is a Dylan guitar is what you're describing, the classic Joan Baez model, if you will, because they're smaller, they record well. And so I began to think, holy cow, maybe I'll get a chance to meet him. But the underlying reason that I wasn't going to part with it was because I was liable for $1,000 on consignment for this guitar. Now, that may not sound like a lot of money for a vintage instrument today, but this is Christmas of 1974. That was like, 10 grand I was on the hook for. I'll bring it to wherever it needs to go, yada, yada, but I'm staying with the guitar. So that's how I got into the sessions. And it took several phone calls before Bob and David agreed to apparently have me come, because at that point they didn't want any other guitarists. They didn't have anybody else lined up to play. So next thing I know, I'm selling them a guitar in Studio A at Sound 80 and meeting the man.
We'd like to thank Chris Weber for his time today, the man who owned the Podium Guitar Store where this whole story started. We're going to go over now to the mandolin player who Chris tracked down at the 400 bar. Mr. Peter Ostroushko, it's a hell of a story. Tell us how you got the call.
I was sick that day. I was very sick. I had pneumonia. And I woke up that morning and decided I was tired of being in bed, which I had been in bed for the entire week. And I drove over to Dinkytown, where the Podium was, because my friend Jim Turdoff was refretting a mandolin for me, and so I went down there to see how he was coming along with that. And when I got into the Podium, it was morning, and Jim says to me, "Have you seen Chris Weber yet?" And I said, "No, I have not. I just got here." He said, "Well, when you do, Chris is going to tell you a good story." I said, "Okay." And about 2 minutes later, Chris shows up and says, "You wouldn't believe what happened to me last night." And I said, "No, I can't imagine what happened to you last night." And he proceeded to tell the story that he just told you. And at the end of it, Jim, who had been sitting there working on my mandolin behind the counter, who has a very snide sense of humor, says to Chris, Chris said, "And you can't believe that they asked me to come back tonight. He said, so I'm going to go and record again tonight. And Jim says, well, you tell Bob if he needs a banjo player or a mandolin player to give us a call. And Chris says, I will. And I went home that afternoon and went back into bed. Slept for about 5 hours. I got up. The sun was just starting to go down. And I was playing pinball. I don't know how long I had been there when the bar owner, bartender, Ted May, says, Peter, you've got a phone call. And so I go over to the bar, and actually it was Jim calling me saying, Chris just called me. He says, get your instruments, come on down here. I said, well, I have to go home and get my instrument. He says, get your instrument, I'll be by to pick you up in 5 minutes. So I walked back to my apartment, got my instruments, and Jim pulled up and got me, and we drove over to Sound 80. To me, the most amazing part about this story actually is this was pre-cell phones, right? So if someone had tried to get a hold of me, they had to know where I might be. And only someone who's a close friend to me would know that if I wasn't at home, where would be the next best place to try and reach him? 400 bar. Jim knew right away where to call. And there's the serendipity in life right there. So we got down to the studio, and Chris Weber met us. I'd never been to Sound 80 before. I'd never recorded anything in my life before.
Really?
Really. This is my first recording session I ever did.
Wow.
And so he met us at the door, and he led us into Studio A, and Bob Dylan was standing there in the shadows, and he came over, and Chris introduced us. And all I remember about it was Dylan saying, what do you got? He says to Jim. Jim says, I have a banjo. And then he looks at me and says, what do you have? I said, I have a fiddle and a mandolin. And then he mumbled something about, oh, I think mandolin would sound really good on this one song. And I could see when we got there that everyone was already packing up. The studio lights had gone down, and like the session was over. And so having the mandolin there made him want to record If You See Her Say Hello over. And so he says to Chris, get your guitar. And as was the case, he taught the tune to Chris, and then he disappeared, and Chris taught the tune to the rest of us. Of course, what I remember about that too, because I was in a fevered state of being really sick, what I remember is that for about the first 15, 20 minutes we were there, and Dylan was smoking cigarettes in the studio. That's another thing that you'd never see anymore. That's verboten anymore, to be smoking anywhere near equipment in a recording studio. And so every time he would smoke a cigarette, his voice would change a little bit. And then he would, true to his form, just say, hit the record button. Only he has now put a capo on the guitar. We went through, 4 or 5 different keys. And I'm just like in my mind trying to think, okay, that was in C, so now we're in the key of E. No, now we're in D. Let's see, the relative minor in D is this. And, I'm just trying to do these changes in my mind. But he just starts strumming, starts playing and singing until he eventually lands on, I believe it was the key of D that we did that song in, where he thought that suited his voice best, and that's where it ended up being. Now, after the session was over, that was just the one song I played on. where I got to meet these great musicians. I went home, Jim drove me home, and I went and crawled back into bed. And I woke up that morning, the next morning, and my fever had broken. And I laid in bed thinking for a while, and then I climbed down out of the loft where my bedroom was on the West Bank there, and got on the phone, and I called the podium. And I said, "Is Jim Tordoff there?" And they said, "Yeah." Could I talk to him? Jim gets on the phone. And I said, "Jim, you wouldn't believe the dream I had last night. I dreamt you and I were at a session with Bob Dylan." And then there was a silence on the phone. And Jim says, "That wasn't a dream." He said, "That happened."
Wow.
I said, "No way." He said, "Way, man."
Beautiful. And that's your very first recording session.
Yes, that was my first recording session.
That's an amazing story, Peter. So, was it just one or two takes of the song?
I think we probably played it at least 5 times in different keys.
And all of those, Kevin Odegaard, none of those alternate takes exist as we know, correct?
We have theories.
Yeah. And?
They've never been found.
Okay. The Holy Grail, I guess, Blood on the Tracks. Peter, that's an amazing story. I have to ask you. Now, 44 years later, everybody that knows you in the Twin Cities and adores you in the Twin Cities, to know you is to adore you, knew you and these other gentlemen played on Blood on the Tracks. But how does it finally feel to see your name on the package?
I haven't seen it yet.
Well, show it to them.
Here's a footnote to this story. Susan Casey, my wife, and I are sitting in Dylan's management office last week, and we barely let the word Peter out of our mouth, referring to Peter Ostroushko. And the person we were talking to is very high up in the management in the organization. Proceeded to list all of Peter's recording credits and the Prairie Home Companion and everything else, and told us that Bob knows all about Peter and loves Peter Ostroushko.
Okay. Let's hear it for Peter Ostroushko.